Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 8 of season 4 of Black Writers Read. Wow, it feels good to kind of say that. We've been doing this for a minute. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I'm the founder, producer, and host of this series. Happy New Year! 2024 has already been a very productive year here at Black Writers Read, even though we're only 6 days in. Towards the end of 2023, we launched a GoFundMe campaign to raise funds to purchase more books for Black Writers Read shelves, which are in libraries at several community colleges in Western Mass and Connecticut, where I'm based. And we've been selling tickets for our upcoming virtual book discussion with Natasha Gordon Chippenberry, who was featured on Black Writers Read on episode 6 of season 3. This is an opportunity to do a deeper dive into her debut historical fiction novel, Finding La Negrita, and to engage in an intimate conversation with the author. So, you have two other ways to keep engaged with Black Writers Read. To contribute to the GoFundMe campaign, you can do that at this link here, which is gofund.me/41481C46. And I'll be showing this link and posting it throughout the episode. And to join us for the virtual book discussion with Natasha, you can register via our website at blackwritersread.com. Let's go ahead and get today's conversation started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind the scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020 on Juneteenth, we've hosted over 60 authors representing 10 plus genres from 4 countries and 15 states. Today, we welcome K E Garland from Florida. K E Garland is a creative nonfiction writer and blogger based in Florida. She uses personal essays and memoir to de-marginalize women's experiences with an intent to highlight and humanize contemporary issues. She has published essays with Midnight Indigo, Raising Mothers, and For Harriet. Other works have appeared in the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, I'm Speaking Now, Black Women Share Their Truth, and 101 Stories of Love, Courage, and Hope. All the Women in My Family Sing, Women Write the World, Essays on Equality, Justice, and Freedom, and other anthologies. Garland's work has been awarded twice with the Florida Writers Association for her unpublished creative nonfiction essay, The Transition, and for her blogging series, Mental Health Matters. She is married with 2 adult daughters and is an associate professor at a community college. In Search of a Salve is her debut memoir, which will be at the center of today's discussion. To learn more about K and her work, please visit kegarland.com. We'll be sharing that link throughout the episode. I want to give a very special shout out to Danielle Jernigan, who was featured on season 3, episode 14 of Black Writers Read, for introducing us to KE, and also Nikisha Elise Williams, whose company published the book that we'll be talking about today. For those who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. KE will read an excerpt from In Search of a Salve, then we'll chat about her book and writing career. If time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to question and answer with those who are joining us today. We typically have viewers joining us from both Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation, or insert them during an appropriate time within our chat. Before I bring KE onto the virtual stage, I have to share just a brief story. So, knowing her bio and also being connected to her via Danielle, I know now that she's based in Florida. I started reading the book, as I hope many of you have, and I saw she's originally from Chicago and has a Detroit connection. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Awesome. I'm originally from Detroit and haven't been back in a couple of years. So it was nice and refreshing to see that. And then we meet for the first time in real time today, prior to today's conversation. And we started talking, and I mentioned to her, because I watched a couple of interviews with her, and in talking with her, I was like, oh my God, another Midwesterner. Like, y'all don't understand. In New England and like other parts of the country, just being in existence is so different. And like being in conversation with someone from your home region after having not been in some time is so refreshing. So it was so nice to be able to have that little bit of time before getting today's conversation started, which is why it started late. But of course, a lot of these conversations do, because I end up, prior to coming on, I end up really chatting with our guest, and it ends up becoming a social hour. And I'm like, oh my God, we got to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and welcome KE now to the virtual stage. Hello.
Hello, Nicole, and thank you again for having me. I truly appreciate it.
I'm so excited to hear you read and chat with you today.
Okay, so
Yes.
I should just get started. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to read from each chapter of this particular book is titled after a person or a place that was instrumental in me coming of age. And so this one is called Will, and it is the first chapter of part two, which is called Addicted. And I thought it would be appropriate for today. So, Will, 1991 to 1993. Addiction is rooted in trauma. However, there is a difference between trauma and trauma, meaning big T trauma and small t trauma. Trauma is perceived as a singular event that changes a person in her life, such as fleeing a country due to war or being raped by a family friend. Society implicitly agrees that events like these are disturbing and can cause PTSD. Conversely, trauma refers to a series of smaller events experienced over a period of time. How one responds to trauma differs and depends on each individual's capacity to deal with stress, which varies for everyone. Death of a parent, car accidents, and sudden relocation are types of traumas, but are perceived as common. Death occurs, accidents happen, teenagers move. However, experiencing a series of trauma in a short time frame, in addition to how the traumatized person and those around her react to the trauma, affects how the person learns to deal with life. When caretakers treat traumas as ordinary events, the person affected does not receive the support or comfort needed to heal. Likewise, if traumas are avoided or downplayed by the person who experiences them, this can lead to a disruption in emotional function, or what is now commonly referred to as emotional dysregulation. Psychological trauma can ensue. As a result, addiction forms an attempt to regulate emotions. It's an effort to assuage discomfort. This is how life culminated for me in the fall of 1991. I unconsciously packed my trauma and dysregulated emotions alongside crates of clothing and notebooks and pursued a bachelor's degree. My family seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief at the idea. She made it. All is well. Their unspoken words were expressed in every exhale. The thoughts were mutual. Attending college was proof of wellness. However, my actual well being was never investigated. Western was a university of hills. Classes were atop a hill. The dorm where I lived was down a hill in an area called the Valley. My roommate, Shamika, was a covert graduate who had befriended me. I had settled into the room a couple of days before her arrival, where I snuggled in my bed, satisfied with beginning a new phase of my life. When Shamika arrived, so did several roaches. Brown insects of varied sizes crawled out of staplers and milled about her bedposts. By the second week of the first semester, my grandmother paid extra for me to room alone. A single room provided excess freedom and allowed Eddie, who was finishing high school, to frequently spend the night. Semester one of college was similar to my senior year. I made few friends, studied, partied occasionally, and awaited Eddie's visits. The second semester of undergrad, I was pregnant a third time. I was no longer ignorant about how babies were conceived or what I was supposed to do to prevent such an occurrence. What my father hadn't shared, Planned Parenthood had explained several times over. The error rested in taking birth control seriously and consistently. But this is hindsight. At 18, internalizing thoughts grew increasingly self deprecating, a common occurrence in traumatized people. I was convinced I must have either been the dumbest teenager to ever live or fated to have Eddie's baby. I'd independently paid for the first two abortions. However, this time I was penniless. I was stuck and needed help. My baccalaureate speech taunted me. Eddie's mother convinced him that he didn't know whose baby this was. After all, I had been in college for months, and who knows what or who I was doing. Eddie knew. He'd spent several weekends in my dorm bed and was the father, yet he refused to help. I called Grandma Honey. "I'm having a baby," I whispered. "What?" "I'm pregnant." "We're going to Planned Parenthood. I'll call you tomorrow and let you know when," she decided. My voice raised. "No, I'm having a baby." "Do you want to have a baby? You have to finish school. You know, it's not murder or anything like that. What you have now is a mass. It's not even a baby yet. How are you going to have a baby? Who's going to watch the baby?" "Shamika." "The girl with roaches?" Grandma Honey laughed. "I'll be there tomorrow," she said and hung up the phone. Revealing to her that I'd already endured this procedure would also require telling her they bookended my senior year under her care. I lacked the courage and didn't want to add further disappointment, so I called my father. "Daddy, I'm pregnant," I said when he answered the phone. "Grandma Honey wants me to have an abortion." "You have to make that decision. Whatever decision you make, you're the one who has to live with it. Just know I'll be there for you, whatever you decide," he said. I'd waited for the day to control my life, but not like this. My baccalaureate speech reverberated in the back of my brain. Now it's time to trust that we can journey on our own. I wanted my father to simply tell me what to do. I wished I could will my mother back to life. She would have assumed control, and an abortion would not be the answer. I remembered how concerned she was when T, one of my Sunday school friends, was pregnant, and how disappointed she was when T chose abortion. One thing was clear. I couldn't trust my father's words. He hadn't been there for me the past few years, so I was doubtful that he'd suddenly be there for a grandchild. My grandmother arranged and paid for my third abortion. She filled the car with conversation on the way to the clinic and on the way back. I wanted to dissolve into the landscape that whizzed outside the window. "Don't you feel better? Like a weight has been lifted?" she asked. Avoidance. "Mm-hmm," I answered. Except I didn't. Having one abortion due to making a mistake as a clueless teenager was one thing, but having a third one as a result of not taking a birth control pill on a schedule was embarrassing. This abortion carried 3 times the shame. Who gets pregnant consecutive times? Only losers, I decided. Who has had 3 abortions in less than 2 years? Just me, I figured. In my adolescent mind, having a baby was less disgraceful than having a third abortion. So I encased myself in a layer of self loathing, not realizing that having the baby and becoming a teenage mother could have carried with it countless unknowns, stigmas, and its own kind of shame. I think I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that chapter. And before we get into conversation, I want to make sure, because we do have some people on who are new to Black Writers Read, which is awesome. Black Writers Read is about the craft of writing. So we talk about the writing and the narrative and not necessarily personal questions, because this is of course a memoir. So I want to make sure to frame that in the conversation, especially given that we do have Q&A available. So for folks who are joining us, if you do have a question, please feel free to post it in the comment section on the platform that you're joining us from today. So the first question that I want to start off with is um, the origin story of In Search of a Salve, Memoir of a Sex Addict. I'd love to know the story behind the title and why this book now. And I want to preface with the why the book now. Not that we can tell what's going to happen in the world and society, but we do have like the Roe versus Wade stuff come up in reproductive justice, and also too like Black women's subjectivity. All these things kind of collide in this moment. So it's just happenstance that the book kind of emerged now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy, right? So
Right.
I always say for many reasons, and before I answer your question, I say that like I know that this book had to be like published right now. It couldn't have been even 5 years ago for many reasons. One reason was I wasn't ready, and I don't think even the world, as quickly as we've been moving, was even ready. So like I think now, and I'll come back to answering, even I'm kind of answering this now. It's kind of like I feel like we're ready for these mental health conversations in a different way that we haven't been in the past, right? So even though the way I chose to write this book, there's a lot of woven in explanation of concepts. I think most people, for example, if I say that I was have anxiety, like there doesn't have to be a huge explanation of what anxiety is necessarily, so that I think the reader can just kind of like be in the story as opposed to in the past, right? But let me go back. The origin story of the book, or the title of the book, because I feel like that might be different.
Oh, let's do the what came first, the title or the book?
Okay. So what I haven't explained, I think, and I'm excited to explain it to you and to everyone listening, is that, and I want to be clear. So the book came out of me literally processing like what in the who hey hell was going on with me, right? It's
Mm.
not that I sat down like, let me write a book. I sat down actually after having like this rock bottom moment. I literally sat in a chair and was like, oh, I have to figure this out. And I have to, because the book is about sex addiction, and because I am married and was married going enduring it, I felt like I had to figure it out myself. Like I can't be, skipping to the therapist and going to figure it out, because then I have to reveal something to my husband, right? So it literally was the process of me starting to write, like, what is my earliest memory of me, just me, period. I think there's a part in the book that's now in part 4 where I say books were my sustenance or something like that. I remember that's the first sentence. So that was the first sentence that I actually wrote when I was trying to figure things out. That's what came to me. Right. So that was going to be the first actual chapter in my mind. I'm like, yeah, I used to really like books. It really used to feed me. How come I'm not reading anymore? And then it just kind of went from there. So that was 2014. And then as I kept writing and memories keep flooding back, I was like, oh, maybe this could be a book, right? But the book was going to be about, initially, just about being adopted and about what it means to be
Mm.
an adoptee. Yeah. Because I was like, oh, that's what's wrong. So I can talk about the title and the process at the same time. Because I'm thinking, that's what's like in quotes wrong with me, right? Oh, I was
Mm.
adopted, and I haven't dealt with that. So then I put the writing to the side and I figure out what that means to be adopted. I was just telling somebody recently, like it was so swept under the rug, my being adopted, that I read the word adoptee and didn't realize. I was like, oh, I think that's me. I'm an adoptee. I had never even I had never even thought that way about myself. Right? I was like, oh, there's a word for this. So that was the process, like writing, having memories, and then reading things like, okay, this is what all adoptees have, these characteristics. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's going to be called that. And the title of that book was going to be Petulia, which you'll have to read the book to find out who that is.
Yep.
So, um, so
Yes.
then I keep writing and I keep thinking, and I run across Melody Beattie's Codependent No More. And I was like, oh, no, 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 that's what was wrong. I was just codependent. And then I explore she has like characteristics. And I'm like, yeah, I was codependent in this way. Like, oh, there's this people pleasing piece. There's this piece where you don't know like where you begin and the other person ends. And I'm like that with my husband. And I'm like that with my grandmother. And so then I start writing those pieces. And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to call it codependent because that'll be like the aim. Because, a memoir is supposed to have like a theme or whatever. So then I run across the sex addiction literature. And at that point, after I read that, then I was like, oh shit, I have to write about sex addiction. And I really didn't want to do that because really with these other iterations, I had left out the sex part. I'm just kind of showing like, oh, like in the book, oh, I had this whatever boyfriend in covert. Oh, and then I met my husband and I'm, just happened to have this other guy over here. So I was like, certainly I am not about to, with all my 3 degrees, come out and tell anybody that I am, that I have experienced this. I'm just not going to do it. But like I said, I'm reading the literature. I'm like, nah, this is what it is for sure. So then I think to myself, I'm going to write this epistolary because I also love the diary of Anne Frank. But Anne Frank really was writing a diary in this cellar, and I wasn't. So it wasn't coming off very authentic, right? I'm like 1982. So it wasn't right because it wasn't what I had done, right? I'm like making up this story, right? So that was going to be like the diary of a sex addict. And then that didn't work. Then eventually, once I really sat with it, I was like, no, I'm going to call it Addicted. And it's going to be a play off of Zane's novel, which is erotica. But I thought it wasn't a good representation of a Black female sex addict. So I was like, no, I'm going to write this and people are going to really know what sex addiction is like. And I'm going to call it Addicted. And then I meet Nikisha Elise Williams, shout out to her, who was like, no, ma'am, you are not going to call this Addicted. And she said that before she even read it. And then she read the work and she was like, definitely not. She was like, because the book is about more than just sex addiction. So she told me, she said, sex addiction needs to be in the subtitle, but it can't be the actual title of this book. And she was like, just go back to the drawing board and hit me back when you have a better title. And so I did that. Yeah, I came up with like 4 different ones. And this was the one she thought was best. And as I've like sat with it, not just because it's been about a year and since we started the process, but even like as I've been talking to people, I really do think it's the most appropriate title because it does represent what I was doing, which was just looking literally for a salve, looking for something to soothe the pain that I'd endured.
Yeah, and a lot of what you just mentioned leads so well into the next question. Because one of the things I was wondering in reading the book, even though it is a depiction of a life story, it is still creative nonfiction. So there has to be, the creating and formulating of characters and story and things like that. And Kathy is such you lived a rich life, but Kathy is such a richly written character, so much so because I'm also a playwright. I saw visually a lot of her life. Like you can see the story in a hope people option this like as a mini series. Like it's just how and I also think it's just your gift as a writer. Like it lives off of the page so well to where it's like I can literally see Kathy in her story because the character is just so well written. So this leads into kind of the next question. In preparing for each, and everyone who's new to this, new to Black Writers Read, because I'm also an academic, my questions can be kind of long. So I'm prepping everybody right now. In preparing for each Black Writers Read interview, we ask our guests, why do they write? In KE's response to the question, and this is an excerpt, she writes, I write to humanize Black women. I don't want to prove that we're strong. I want to show why we don't have to be. I don't want to prove that we're magical. I want to demonstrate why it is a challenge for us to be mundane, to make mistakes. I write to destigmatize issues, to make the political plain, to peel back the interior of not only my life, but also yours. I write to be the mirror, to say what is oftentimes unsaid, to offer alternative interpretations of a common experience. Therefore, I use memoir to illustrate the authenticity of an issue, but from a Black woman's perspective. Also, too, I want to kind of wrap this in here as well. What I believe what Black Writers Read does is we really look at literary contributions that really, and given that I don't censor myself, that really fuck with the canon. It's
Mhm.
like what is it? Because the canon is so white, it's so, this box, and it's like, what are writers out here doing to really expand the box, break the box, and all of that. And I believe this work does that. So here's the question. In Searching of
Yeah.
a Salve follows Kathy through a coming of age narrative, which is also, on top of memoir being my favorite, coming of age stories are my favorite as well. She has a unique sense of agency and ways of seeking self discovery. Can you give us a snapshot into her character and a preview of Kathy's journey to entice folks who haven't yet to pick up and read the book?
Yeah, so thank you too for all these super nice words. I appreciate them. And no, something that has been echoed repeatedly is the visual aspect of the book, right? Um, the imagery and the scene setting. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. Um, I'm not sure, and I read these questions. I wanted to say I really did read the questions, Nicole, and I didn't. but I don't like to necessarily prepare an answer, I'm
Yeah.
not sure what to say because the character Kathy in this book and really me as well is a complex, like layered individual.
Mhm.
Um, so I think what I try to do, and hopefully this will answer the question. Growing up, I was raised as an only child. I was raised as, for a very long time, on my mother's side, I was the only grandchild, like up until I was 20 something years old. Yeah.
Oh.
And then on the other side, I was the youngest grandchild. And so even though they might disagree, in my mind, I was told to sit down and be quiet a lot, in many different ways. Like, what you have to say here is of no consequence in any
Yeah.
way, right? And so that creates a certain type of person, um, who, first of all, lives in her head a lot and always has these like, oh, well, I wish I could say this, but I can't say this because I'm in a room full of adults. And because I just want to say, and I say this a lot, because it wasn't 2023, it was not the 21st century. It was back in the day where if somebody told you to sit your ass down, and not necessarily like that, but if they told you to go sit down, that's it. You don't, it's not but or I or none of that. You go somewhere and you know this, Nicole.
Yes, I
So
do.
right, and there was a lot, and then so when you think about it, and then I didn't have like a lot of peers around me. That's like I have cousins, but it's not like they were in my house all the time. So it really was just me a lot. So what I tried to show is I ended up with a lot of issues around identity. Um
Oh.
yeah, and even though I didn't know that at the time, but that's what was happening. I'm having this issue of who am I as a smart person? Who am I as an person who was adopted? Who am I as a Black person in this? Because even though I was smart, I grew up in the hood, like by all accounts, the hood. Um, but then I got bused to another school for smart people. So it's all these things like, well, who am I really? And that's what I was trying to show was kind of like the journey. That to me, that's part of the coming of age part of it, is showing how I had to figure out who am I. And by the end of the book, I figured that out, which was a huge part of the, for lack of a better word, issue, I think. Yeah.
Nice. Each chapter, so after this question, there's a really good question that came into one of the comment sections that I'll pose after I ask this question. So I think it will fit in nicely here. Each chapter of In Search of a Salve focuses on either a particular relationship or the evolution of a particular relationship, which is one of the reasons why I think this book is so smart. How does this style choice contribute to developing Kathy's overall narrative?
Yeah, I think, and I want to say that this was a combined choice between Nikisha and me. It wasn't, so the titles came later and she suggested that. And I have to say, like, I like to big up, I don't like to act like writing. So writing is a solo project, right? But this book wouldn't be what it is, like what people are reading without Nikisha. So I'm gonna always
Hmm.
like praise her for that. So the chapters were written, but she was the one who was like, why don't we name these, like, because some of them had names and some of them didn't. And so we made this conscious decision for that to happen. But I do think that it was important because relationship, in my mind, does create you, right? So we are in this space of talking a lot about attachment styles now. And all that is to
Mm.
honor, right? Like where you came from, how were you raised? So I think before the attachment style conversation, it was kind of like, oh, you got daddy issues or you got mama issues. Well, what it is you had a parental issue
Yep.
that taught you how to be in the world. And we say, like, I'll say it loosely, issue. I mean, everybody, nobody leaves your parents' house unscathed, I just think. And it doesn't have to be like something huge, which is kind of what I tried to show, like with this relationship between Grandma Honey and me. It doesn't have to be that somebody's like beating you every day, right? Because I think that's also part of the Black narrative is we always have to be portrayed in these hugely traumatic like ways when sometimes there's just a middle thing, right? It's just not being heard, like I said earlier. So what type of person does that create? And then over time, how do you continue to relate to your parental figure if they never want to hear you?
Yep.
Right? Like when you're 16, that's like, okay, whatever. But then when you're 26 or 36, then what happens? And that's what I wanted to show is, so how do I become a fully self-actualized person while still being in relationship with these people?
Mm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
this goes back to why Kathy is just such a richly written character. So someone um gave made a great comment and question. And this is someone, her name is hope I'm pronouncing it right, Tamara. And she mentions that she loves your book. She's read it. She's curious as to why you chose to read an excerpt from this particular chapter today, and saying that suggesting that it should have been another chapter, and the chapter that she offered was I'm just gonna post it here because my pronunciations today is a hot mess. Epistolary, a
Oh,
series of
epistolary.
letters. Epistolary, thank you.
So I don't, first of all, hey Tamara. I went to school with her and we have
Nice.
reconnected due to this book. Um, so I don't know. Is she saying she didn't like, why did I, so I'll just answer this question. The question is, why did I choose to read this particular chapter?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's this chapter is actually one of my favorite chapters. Mainly because I think people don't understand, kind of like what I was getting to with the last question. We're so used to talking about trauma as if it has to be like something huge, right? And and so for example, like I say in the book, if I told you that I was like a refugee here in America from some major war, you would instantly be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't imagine what you've gone through." But if I say to you, and this has happened in my life, even when I've said, my mother died when I was 16, and people are kind of like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "No, that was a big deal." And so this has been my experience. Or even just saying, like, I was in a car accident where I had a head injury. And it's kind of like, "Oh, okay." Well, no, it's right. So I chose to read from that particular chapter because I really want to center interrelated trauma and how it can
Mhm.
impact all of our lives, right? It's things that there are things that we have to deal with, and I'm not sure that we're always dealing with them in the ways that we should, because we don't see them necessarily as major. Some of that is generational. I am Gen X, and we seem to have a very common experience of just being told to go be quiet and it'll be okay, whatever it is. But that's not okay. So
Mhm.
that's why I really like that chapter, because it really kind of, I feel like, centers everything. Like, everybody thought it was okay. And especially with the college piece, which I kind of weave
Mhm.
throughout. When people think you're intelligent, it seems that nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Because if you're intelligent, apparently you can figure it out. You'll be okay. Yeah, like, and that's not always the case. So I kind of really like that chapter because it shows that everything was not okay. But I'm getting A's and B's in undergrad, so okay. But yeah, it just, you end up still traumatized. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Growing up and thinking within the genre of creative nonfiction, what was your most formative moment and how does it appear in your book? How do you honor this moment in your life? And what would you like for readers to take away from how it is represented In Search of a Salve?
So I think the most formative moment really was my adoptive mother's death.
Mhm.
And because it really did impact who I became as a person, in a lot of different, like, like interwoven ways. So even if, and if we're not just talking about, like, I don't mean just the traumatic aspect of it, but it really shaped the type of person I became. Um, and so maybe it is the trauma related. I'm thinking, so for a very long time, something that people don't, and I don't know if this is common, but for me, it was common. I was like afraid to die. And what I've told people is, you don't understand what it means, what death means, until somebody close to you dies.
Yeah.
It is a very interesting experience to see somebody one day and then the next day they are no longer there. And so I lived my life in a way where, I could attribute achieving so much to being gifted, but I know for myself, there was this fear, like, oh, I could literally not be here tomorrow. So I got to do all of the things right now because I don't have tomorrow. And in some ways, still, like, I still function like, I have to tell myself, like, no, there's tomorrow. And if not, it'll be okay. But that really
Mhm.
shaped who I was and how I, like, moved through the world. Sans any addiction. It just was like, oh, like, I don't know what to do. Then the other thing is, as a woman, losing your mother at such an early age shapes who you think you are as a woman, and also the experiences that you have, right? So you don't, or I of course wasn't thinking this when I was 16,
Mhm.
but major things, right? Like graduating from high school, then graduating from college, but then these major woman things, like getting married, and not having your mother there, or having a baby and not having your mother there to like mother you. I think a lot of times, especially in the States, we think that mothering ends at a certain point, or maybe I thought that. But you, like throughout your life, you always need your mother. And at these different phases to kind of like usher you into womanhood or wifehood or motherhood, right? And that was something that I also tried to show in this book. Like I didn't have that. And even though I reflect, like a memoir is a reflection of your life, at the
Mhm.
time I didn't know that was what the issue was. I'm just thinking, oh, I'm just whatever. But I was really angry about it. And as a result, lived my life in a certain way that really was like unexpressed anger for not having a mother. Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes, and it's so interesting. I have to preface with, it's so interesting. Like the people who I have a natural connection with, I lost both of my parents recently, and I lost my
Mhm.
mom at 35. But it was before I got married, before I finished no, after I finished one of my grad degrees, and pivotal moments, and like how much you don't really realize how much your parent, and then I lost my dad 2 years after that. And you don't realize how pivotal and important your parents are and your formative figures until they're gone. And it's like you have to do a whole other growing up, a whole other exploration, and a whole other finding yourself. And so it doesn't surprise me that you losing your mom and also losing her at such 16 at such a young age, like
Yeah.
how that played a part. And that really like gutted me as I was reading the book, because I was just like, she lost her mom at 16. I have a friend who lost her mom at like 7, and just really
Hmm.
thinking about how do you become into your own when you lose someone so important at such a young
Yeah.
age.
Yeah, and I have to add, at one point, I remember this conversation I was having like with my uncle, and he had lost his mother, but it was really late in his life. And he was like, "Yeah, you don't grow up until you lose your mother." And I was like, "Yeah, tell me about it." And he was like, his response was, "You don't know what that feels like. You have grandma honey." And so it's like one of those silence. Do you see that? Like it's so small. It's like this one
Yeah.
sentence. And I'll never forget that because I was like, well, Grandma Honey is not my mother.
Oh,
And that's the other thing that happens, right? Is you might have all these mother figures, but no one is your mother, no matter
yeah.
what.
And then for folks who have read the book and for people who need to read the book, Grandma Honey is a very interesting figure. So for him to say you still have Grandma Honey is I'm sorry, Uncle, if you're still with us, is very dismissive because of who she was, not who she was to you, but who she was and how
Period.
she right and how she interacted with you. So just like
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm supposed to be grateful.
Yes. Next question. Yes,
Yep.
I'm like that's a whole other I feel like that's a whole other like book.
It is. Everybody asks about Grandma Honey. And so, yeah, at some point, I don't know.
Oh
I need to talk to
wow.
somebody publicly about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. In Search of a Salve uses a significant amount of detail about places and relationships. You talked a little bit about this, but I would love to know a little bit more about the source material for all of this because of just the richness of it. It's like, did you journal? How did you archive all of this to be able to write about it? And then talk a little bit about your writing process.
Okay. So, two parts to this, I think, maybe three. But while writing, so like I said, I would write and write and write when I have a memory, but then I would get to a memory and I'm like, did that happen? So part of my process was to actually reach out to people. So for example, I have this boyfriend in the book, Eddie, and I reached out to Eddie like, yo, do you remember that time when we did prom? And then afterwards we left prom. And all I remember is I got really drunk. Do you remember that? And he's like, yeah, because here is what happened. And then he would fill in all the blanks for me.
Mhm.
And then I would just write it all down, right? Because you can't trust your mind all the time. Um, so sometimes I'm corroborating things with other people and then adding to that based on what they said. So I honestly, like in that particular scene, all I remembered is what I said. Like, we went to prom,
Mm.
we got drunk, somebody came looking for me or something. And then he was like, nah, girl, let me tell you what happened. I was like, okay. So so I like fill that in, right? And I think that's the creative part of the creative nonfiction. I don't necessarily
Mm.
remember that. But him telling me, then it kind of jogs my memory, and then I can remember whatever this circular bed. I know what it feels like to drink too much and vomit, so I can fill in these gaps. So that's one way. Um, Another is that, I think some people might be familiar with a book called The Body Keeps Score. So yeah, a lot of times when you are traumatized and don't have a way to release, you hold information literally. So, speaking of Grandma Honey, I actually spoke to her recently and she asked us a similar question, like, how do you even remember all these things? And I told her it's not necessarily like a brain thing. I
Mm.
remember exactly what it felt like to be sitting in the living room after my mother died and everybody talking around me. Because like I said earlier, I lived in my head a lot. So by the time I'm 16, that's just it's like quick, like, oh, let me go to this space. I remember that. I remember exactly what it felt like being in court with my father. Um, so that I was able to write those scenes because I literally remember those things. Sometimes too, though, I would use the literal internet, right? If I'm thinking about a place, like thinking like, oh, we walked on Lake Michigan. I didn't live near Lake Michigan, so I would have to look up and
Mhm.
look at photos and see, oh, okay, maybe we walked from here to here. So it's combination of all of those things. Talking to people as needed, feeling literally in my body, and then sometimes just like doing a Google search of something to see what exactly was what. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
As memoir is a fictionalized exploration of the self, what have you learned about yourself while writing the book? I'd also love to know what you did and do for self care when you're writing about such personal experiences and themes like abandonment, sexuality, sexual exploration, addiction, grief, family issues, and self discovery. And there's even more themes in the book. So I'm like, but those are like the heaviest.
Oh, like she's reading this list, like, oh yeah, that is. Oh yeah, okay. Um, like, yeah, that's a list. Okay. So the question was, what was the first part of the question?
So the
Doc,
first,
Dr.
again, the
Young.
thickness. Yeah. What have you learned about yourself while working on the book?
Oh,
And then what did you do for self care while you were writing the book?
okay. So, I think because the process of me writing and creating the book was so interwoven, I kind of learned side by side, like all of the things that I mentioned earlier. So because I was literally trying to figure myself out, um, there were things that I learned while writing the book that seem obvious, right? When you're reading it, you might be like, oh, yeah, duh, you had anxiety. I promise you, Nicole, I didn't know I had anxiety until like 2 years ago. And that was like, yes. And now this is a true story. I really, and it was due to writing this stuff and reading. Like I was like, oh, so when you have anxiety, you feel like X. I feel like that all the time. Like I just thought that
Mm.
was life. No. So I literally learned about who I am as a person and like uncovering all these things that were like suppressed while I wrote. I
Mhm.
learned that I was sad. And again, it might sound like, what? Because when you read it, yeah, it's pretty heavy, right? I didn't know that. I didn't know all this time I was just sad and that I needed to
Mm.
grieve. Yeah. Um, I didn't know like how much I relied on people. And I don't know if I'm saying this right, but like kind of like to cover up everything. Like I feel so
Mhm.
comfortable when there's a lot of people because I felt so alone. So maybe that's what it was. I learned that I was more alone, that I felt lonely is the word. I was
Mm.
lonelier than I thought I was. Um, and so, like all of these things that people have read or will read, I actually learned them as I was writing this book. Yeah, yeah, because it really was a like self discovery journey.
Wow.
Yeah. What was the second question though? I'm
The
sorry, I
self,
don't.
like any self care that you did for yourself, given one that it seems like
Oh,
you learned a lot about yourself, and then also too, you were writing about and like reliving such heavy stuff.
yeah. Yeah. So the self-care came exactly as I wrote it in part 4, but now it's like such a part of my life that I don't even call it like self-care. It's just what I have to do to live.
Mm.
So literally yoga is a part of my life, but not just I only write about yoga in the book, but I actually exercise like 4 times a week. I have to. Otherwise, I like spiral all the way down. And there's like some scientific proof about exercise and how it helps your mental health. So I exercise 4 times a week. I do meditate. Sometimes it's like a guided meditation, and other times it just might be me like figuring out how to like not get lost in all the thoughts. Um, Exercise, meditation, diet is super important. I don't think that I wrote about this, but um diet is really, really important, especially our sugar intake. So I've done a few like 30-day like sugar fasts and my mind is super clear. So sometimes when I want to write or dig a little deeper, then I'll do something like that. But also to take care, like you said, for self care. I also want to a point about meditation that helped me. Um, for a long time I didn't know like what I felt. So kind of like with the other question when I'm saying like I didn't even know I was sad because I didn't know how I what a feeling was. I really didn't. Meditation helped me to like when you know what's like zero, then it's easier when you're in a situation to know like, oh, well, like I can feel, the coworkers getting on my nerves and now I can feel something rising up. Or or like I said, if I don't exercise, then I can feel myself going down. So
Mhm.
meditation helped me to see like what is ground zero so that I know when I'm in a situation when I need to calm myself down. Um, so I think those are the main things. Like to be able to regulate my own emotions is the main thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. Because I'm trying to get into a meditation practice now. In Search of a Salve and a host of your other work are creative nonfiction, particularly personal essays. Why is creative nonfiction the vehicle that carries your literary voice? And then, what are some advantages and limitations of this particular genre?
So I am not a fiction writer. Like I'm just not. I've tried to do it, but it always just ends up being a true story, and that's not fair to real fiction writers, right? If I'm just gonna
Mm,
write a true story and change the names and dates of something, so it's just not in my nature. And I also feel
mm,
like life is crazy enough where I don't have to create a fantasy world so that you can get like, you know, a point to be nice to your neighbor or whatever, cherish your mother, whatever this message might be. No offense to
mhm,
people who write fantasy. It's just not my thing. I would rather, and it's been my experience, I would rather tell you a true story about whatever because I know you're going to be like, "Oh, me too. Yeah, my
mm,
whatever dad did that." Or I thought I was the only one whose sister did blah 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 or what like I cannot tell you, Nicole, the countless times I have written something that I thought was shameful or no one else knew what I was talking about. And as soon as I write it, everybody's like, oh yeah, yeah, I feel like that too. Even this book, even though the subtitle is like sex addiction, I've not talked about sex addiction with anyone except one person who was a certified sex addiction therapist. But otherwise, we've talked about, like you said, the other 20 themes of the book, because that's the humanizing part, right? The grief part, that no matter when you lose your mom, you know what that feels like. I have a friend who lost her fiance. And even though this has nothing to do with losing a fiance, soon she was like, oh yeah, this grief part I feel. So that's why I use creative nonfiction. Yeah, because I think that it's a way to touch other people's lives, like in a real, literal, real way. Um, I'm so sorry, I keep forgetting the second part of your question.
No, you were on to that in terms of like the advantages and limitations. Because myself,
Oh,
like I'm trying, like I wrote a flash fiction story, and to like fictionalize was so hard because there is a particular style when you are writing fiction that
mhm.
I haven't really been gifted with. Like, yes, I've written plays, and that's fiction, but a lot of
That's
it
different.
is, yeah, it's a heightened reality. It is a
Right.
heightened, a lot of the plays I've written, it's a heightened reality. And what I write, it's a
Yeah.
heightened reality. So I give a lot of props to people who can write fiction because it's a
Yeah,
gift.
it's hard work.
It's hard.
Well, and the other thing, like the limitation, I think, with creative nonfiction, there's a book, I think it's called Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm. Excellent, excellent fictional novel. And I tend to lean toward fiction that seems real. Except I remember I wrote this in my notes. Like, the thing with fiction writers is you can make up this ending, you can make up something, right?
Mm.
With creative nonfiction, nah, like if, whatever happens, happens. And it's up to the writer to make sense of it and either to decide to make it into a little bow or not. So I think that's part of it. It's like I don't think you really control the endings of things. They just are what they are in my mind. That's what I think.
Yeah, and that is an interesting limitation that I never thought about with creative nonfiction because if your story is about this event or this moment, it does end, and it's not, is it really fair to the story, even though it is creative, to change or amend the ending when you know that the ending was this and not
Right.
this?
Right. Right.
Yeah. I'm really excited about this next question because I noticed as I was writing the questions and reading your bio at the same time, and I was like, wait a minute. There's a pattern I'm seeing here, and there's a particular mission. So, your work has appeared in publications like Midnight Indigo, For Harriet, and Chicken Soup for the Soul series. These each have a particular audience and writer in mind, and I think this goes back to the your response to why you write. Why is it important to you to write for this particular audience? For those, because those three that I named, I was reading, I was like, they're very well. Chicken Soup for the Soul is a lot, but the ones that you've written for, it's Black
Yeah.
women centered. It's very specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I want us to be free, man. I just want us to be free.
Mm.
And I don't think that we are able to be, and I have to like I'm gonna like tear up. I don't think that Black women are able to be free in ways that other women are. And I don't even want to just say white women, just other
Right.
women, period. We don't get to do shit. And I mean, not like we don't get to. So the reason why, right, that I didn't want to have Sex Addict is because we can't be seen as anything except perfect and strong and magical. And I'm like, nah, it's not magic. It's just not.
Yeah.
It's cool to say that we're resilient. I get it. But it is not a magical feat to endure what Black women have endured. It's not. It requires suppression a lot of times.
Yeah.
It requires repression. And I hate to like throw out all these clinical terms. I'm not a psychiatrist, but it requires so much just to get up and leave the house and do your job. And then think about the jobs that we do have. Like a lot of us are in these high powered jobs. You can't go to your job and break down. No, because you're gonna be seen. So there's the woman part. You're gonna be seen as weak. You can't just go in and not even break down. Maybe just be like, I don't know, like fuck all y'all, right? Like you
Yeah,
sometimes you want to say that, but
I
you
want to do that so bad.
right. But you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it because you'll be seen as crazy. You can't break down and cry because you'll be seen as weak. Um, so then what I've noticed, and this is why I'm on like this really like this mission, what I've noticed is then we start performing like men in certain spaces
Mm.
where we're not supposed to be like men. Men are men and we're us. Um, and I can only speak to being a Black woman, right? And I don't want to generalize. And I get why it comes to that. But even in some ways with this story, I'm trying to show like, dude, like you have to have space at your house to just be and be okay, right? If you can't have space at your house to cry and yell and be you, then where can you do it? And that's the mission I'm on, is to just I want us to be free. I want us to have the rights that everyone else has, to make mistakes and to recover from mistakes,
Mhm.
to have mental health issues and not it be a like big deal, or it should be a big deal like it is for everybody else. um
Right.
Either way, right? I just want us to be free. So
Mhm. Yeah, as I
yeah.
sit here looking at pills of mine on my desk, because I have a lot of mental health issues, and then also too thinking about the compartmentalizing and the code switching that has to happen. Like right now at my full-time job, which I work a lot. I have that job and I
Mhm.
teach at two places. In my full-time job, I run an education company, and it's just like in a small part of the country, and it's like I'm at this time now where I'm like, I have to create boundaries for myself because so much of me blurs lines. Like, I have multiple dimensional relationships with people because in some instances I hired, like, they're hired for the company. And so
Mhm.
it's like there's a multi-dimensional relationship. And I'm trying right now to build those boundaries. And it's been really hard. And I'm like, okay, so
Yeah.
why it feels like everyone else can do this but not me. And I'm like, oh, wait, I'm not the only one. Or even, I don't want to mention it now because I'm like, there's so many people talking about it, but the situation that we're seeing now about Black women and leadership in a particular industry. And it's like, because I'm like, I'm like, if I see one more fucking video, I
Don't
love
do
that.
it. Yeah,
Right.
don't do it.
I love that a lot of people are talking about it, but it's just like, now I'm questioning like how we like I've always questioned how we show up in
Mhm.
spaces, but it's like I'm now even questioning how this is how I'll contribute to the discourse on this topic. I, am now curious as to how we're showing up in spaces where somebody like everybody else, that the seat at the table notion. So like
Mhm.
everybody has a seat at the table and somebody brought over a wet ass cardboard box that's been sitting outside that's about to collapse for you to sit at this table.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and now it's like you've been sitting on that box and the box is welting. Now it's collapsed, your ass is on the floor, and now your
Right.
ass is not at this table anymore. And it's
Not it,
like
but they will be like, "But what do you think, Nicole?"
right.
What? Like, you can't even think. And right, so you're not even right, so you're on the in this space, not really in this space, and then they want you to carry the load also of all the Black people problems of the whole thing. And it's like, what is happening here?
It's like y'all
It's
want me
too
to dig up
much.
ancestors and like
Yeah,
carry their load. I'm like, their load is done. Like
it
I
is.
yeah, and so I love that, the mission of your work is for Black women to be free. And it's like, what does free mean? And that is really existing in our identities and being able to be all of these things, which I
Right.
love.
Yeah. We get to be multidimensional.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And this,
Yeah.
I think, segues really nicely into my next question. And then I'm going to pose a really great question that came in through the feed. To be
Mhm.
able to write a memoir, it seems that there has to be some distance from the actual reality and also some growth experience. One thing that makes In Search of a Salve such a strong and important read, I think, is that the reader sees the character Kathy do some of the, I think she does some of this work. Now, after writing In Search of a Salve and having it released to the world, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
I wish that I knew that I could just be myself.
Mm.
That's yeah, I really do. I often think if I could have just known this, that it was okay to be myself, how different my life might have been. Um, Even with the backdrop of the interrelated traumas, I just think knowing you can be yourself. And so, quick story. I have a friend who recently, she's like, she doesn't even understand how someone can grow up and not be themselves. And something that I don't know if I showed this in the book, and you can tell me, but I didn't give these details, but every step of the way, it was always something like wrong with what I was doing
No,
with
you do
in
it.
term yeah, okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so it was all these little things. I know I didn't put this, but sometimes it will be physical things, right? Like, "Oh, you're
Mm.
slew-footed. You need to turn your feet in. Oh, your spine is whatever. You need to sit up, otherwise you're gonna grow up with a," and how the elders always
Yep.
predicting your future malaise. So it was all these things. And so I was like, yeah, that's how it happens. It happens chip by chip where you're like, okay, am I turning my feet in? I remember my mother, I used to walk without swinging my arms. And
Mm.
oh goodness, I'm reading this. And so I used to walk without swinging my arms. And I remember feeling so berated. She's like, no, when people walk, they swing their arms. So for the longest time, I'm like, am I swinging? And then you have to do it like the opposite. So I'm like this robot walking with this. Like, am I doing it?
Yeah.
But like every little chip, right? And then that's how you get to
Mhm.
be an adult. So that would be my advice. Like, I wish that I would have known that. It's okay, whatever you're doing.
Mm. Before I segue into, because we have a question from folks who are joining us, and then one last question from me. I want to share this comment
Okay.
that came through, which is beautiful. As you were talking about the mission of your work is wanting Black women to be free. Yes, freedom. We can't heal what we conceal, and that is just
Okay.
so important to remind ourselves about. So the question that came in, it says, the book is so relatable on so many levels. Was it your intent to create, and I can kind of see this because I'm of this generation. Was it your intent to create an ode to Gen X as the book developed?
Listen, it was not my intent to do, like, I didn't do that on purpose. But I've heard this from so many, and yeah, that's from Rabita. I went to school with her as well.
Mhm.
So the thing that happened, and she's not the only one who's made this comment. Other people have in our generation have made this comment, right? And I don't know of a book, not that I've read all the books, but I don't know of a book that kind of just really shows what it was like for us growing up. Aside from these memes and gifts, right? Yes, we were left on our own. Yes, we had to figure stuff out, but I'm not sure if there's a book that actually shows it, like what that really meant. Um, for that time period. So no, that wasn't the actual intent, but I am glad that that's what happened, because even though, yeah, like my experience was a little different than other people's experience, that it was a common thing, right? Like I said, it was kind of like, yeah, just go sit in the corner. So I wasn't sent outside a lot. I was sent to go read a book. Okay. Right. Right. So here I am. So I mean, it paid off. Thank you. But yeah,
Um,
that was my thing. Like, go sit in your room and read a book. I'm like, okay. Yeah, but just get out of
yeah,
here. Was the
just
yeah.
get out of here.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen,
And-
they did the best they could.
yes. And what's interesting now, this conversation made me think of this, especially now since a lot of nostalgic things are reemerging. I'm 44, so I'm of this generation. And one of
Mhm.
the things that I always thought of, I'm like for example, now on Hulu, you could stream like Living Single and Girlfriends, like all of these formative shows from the 90s and early 2000s around times when I needed those that black woman representation. But what's interesting, I
Mhm.
thought about this because even now, like my stepdaughter, she's watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And I'm like,
Mhm.
hold up. I just thought about this. I'm like, okay, wait, whoa. So, me as a black woman in my 40s, I had like the cartoons and the little kids experience. But then
Mhm.
it jumped straight into, in terms of representation, living single and the black woman adult. I
Right.
don't know of any black female teenage experience represented in media besides those like really weird. No, I don't even think black people were on the after school specials on ABC. I don't even remember. But it's like
Yeah, I don't think so. But you're right,
yeah.
right? Like we're always like the I guess the running joke is we're like the middle child, right? So that's also why, because no one's thinking we need content or we need whatever.
Mhm.
Because for what? Yeah. So I think that's a good point when you think about like media representation, especially. Because I was thinking about what's that movie with the roller skating? Is it ATL? No. Was that the name of that movie? Do you know what I mean? It was like a
Yeah, I
they
do
were in
know
a
what you're
roller
for
rink.
some reason the title is like, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Something about right, so that came to mind, but then I was thinking like, but that wasn't my world, I don't think. That wasn't
Mhm.
my coming of age story. So, yeah, I don't know where it is, but hopefully it's this book.
Right, yeah, because my coming like I remember in my teenage years there was the black women adult representation, but when it came to the
Mhm.
teenage representation, I remember reading like the Babysitters Club, and I'm like, where am I? And how, like, do I just one day go from age 9 to like I graduated from
Yep.
college and I'm 21 and I have a job? Like, there is no in between. I wonder if that explains why my 20s were a hot ass mess. But it's like,
Listen. That's exactly right. That is exactly our all of our Gen X Black woman experience. Yeah, where where are we?
yeah, whereas like
Yeah.
especially like our teenage selves, because so much, and I see this in my job because I work at an arts education organization and we send teaching artists out, and I hear these
Mhm.
conversations, and I also teach at a very interesting college. I teach for young women who got their high set or GED and they're returning back to college. So it's like
Mm.
I'm always trying to understand ages specifically 13 to like 30 for
Mm.
black women specifically. It's just like I, you're working out a lot. You are working, and for
Yeah.
many of my students, not only are they working out a lot for themselves, they also are working out an identity as a mother and a wife. And so I'm just like,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
Where is that?
yes, I totally have to bring this up. I totally forgot about Moesha. Someone mentioned
Oh,
having Moesha. I totally,
so
yeah,
for
because
me though, so maybe for
mhm.
you, right? And that's the other thing. So maybe for you, Moesha, I think I was grown when Moesha was. So I have like 6 years on you. But I remember Moesha,
Mhm.
but not relating to it like relating to Moesha.
Mhm.
Yeah. Right. So there's that part too. But I do think that was
Mhm.
a good, yeah.
I totally forgot about Moesha. I don't know what, and I had her at that age, but I can't remember why I didn't think of that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll all come to us when we're done. Because I just thought about the Monique. What was that show?
Oh, the Parkers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's right, and the Parkers too. That's right. The last
Yeah.
question I have, and I hate that we're at this part of the night, as as the sun is setting here in Connecticut, because it gets dark here. Like what, just a couple of weeks ago, it was dark at like 2:30. I'm like, what is happening?
Are you serious?
Yeah, it in the winter it gets dark really early here. It's now 4:30, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's getting there, but it's not as dark as it was this like 2 weeks ago. At
Right.
4:30, it looked like it was 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, why is this so
Yeah, that is bad. Mm-mm.
dark? So the last question I'd like to close this out with is, what is next for you, KE, and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
So I've thought about this question for a while, just because I know you ask it. I think the simple answer is I am focused, especially the book has been out in the world for like 3 months now. Um, and the response has been positive largely. So what I am focused on now is just elevating the book
Mm.
in whatever way possible. And elevating, one or all of those messages that we talked about in the book, because I do think that it is important for us to now, kind of like one of the viewers said, you can't heal like what you don't reveal or something like that. So I think it's time now that we kind of have spaces where we can reveal things and that we can talk about them in a safe environment, so that we can be the multifaceted Black women that we want to be and that we want to be seen. Um, oh, thank you. So yeah, so any way that I can elevate the book and elevate the message, and that can be from, of course, people reading it, buying it, and reading it, to the hardest part, which seems to be getting people to write reviews for it after they read it. um,
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to say I think, like I haven't looked every day. I have like 27 reviews right now on Amazon, and they're excellent. But I know that more than 27 people have read this book, but it's
Mhm.
difficult I don't know what it is. Like, it's difficult to get people to just like even do the stars, and, you know, and maybe they're intimidated, I would say, because the reviews on Amazon are very intimidating, I would say, because so many people have been so affected that they've had so much to say. Um,
Mm.
so I can see somebody looking and be like, oh, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say all of that. You can just say whatever the stars are, and, you know, great book or whatever you want to do. But
Mm.
any range of ways that you feel moved to elevate this book, I am receptive to. I did a soft tour in October. Um, if I can speak to anyone, I would want to do that. But yeah, I'm in a space of being open right now. So
Mm.
yeah.
And if anyone wants to book KE, here's her website for more tours, kegarland.com. Also, please, and thank you for mentioning the reviews, because I was looking too and I was like, I know more people read this book, so why aren't there more
It's
reviews,
hard.
more stars? It's hard, but I do wonder why people don't review. I think that's an interest, because I've asked people too, like, review the podcast.
Right.
Nothing.
Do they do it? No. Yeah.
No.
I don't
I
know
got
why that's
3.
so. Yeah, and you know that you have more than 3 listeners. So, yeah, I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Because 2 for
But if you've read
me,
it, review.
Yes, thank you. Because for me, like with this platform, I'm like, it is I feel like I want it to be a very like audience, like shared and informed experience to
Mhm,
where I'm like,
mhm,
supporters, audience, let me know. Do I need to change something? Do I need to amend something?
mhm.
Like, I want to be able to know that. So if people feel moved,
Yeah, that's the
feel
educator
free.
in you.
Yeah, because I know with at one of my institutions, they and I'm not gonna name which one, but the the instructor reviews, oh, my students are very candid. I'm like, but I wonder if they do it because they're anonymous. And I'm like, but you can be anonymous. Like I know iTunes, I think you can review kind of
Mhm,
anonymously, I
mhm.
believe.
Yeah,
But
but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It seems it's the hardest, like across everything I've done, it's been the hardest thing to get. But so this actually is the highest, these are the highest number of reviews I've had, not just Amazon, but across whatever, for a project at this phase of the project. So there's that part. But it's literally some of it has been because, somebody will read it and they DM me or text me and they're like, "Oh my God, blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, "Okay, can you say that on whatever?" And they're like, "Okay." Yeah.
mm. And I have to show this comment because I get this from my students. We tend to review when we've had bad or poor experiences. We have to start giving kudos and flowers when we had good experiences as well. Because whenever I tell students, because I teach writing, whenever I'm like, here comes the peer review assignment, and they're like, oh, is critique only bad? No. And I'm going to teach you how to do it
Right.
more constructively. And I'm like, it's not just like giving the it's not just bad. Like we want to hear we want to hear the praise. We want to hear especially flowers because in
Right.
this industry we already hear a lot of really negative. So if you had a great experience, with the book, please share that because this
Yeah.
industry can
Yeah.
be fierce.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Mhm. So, KE, thank you so much for spending so much of your Saturday afternoon with us. And it was so great to finally meet you.
You too. I had an amazing time. And I also want to reiterate, I want to make sure people heard you say somebody should option this book. They should.
Yes, because my training is in theater and I'm a playwright. And like, as I was reading it, like I could visually see, but also too, I have to name, I'm a Detroiter. I have family from Chicago. I'm familiar with a lot
Mhm.
of the places that you name, but the way that your storytelling works, it lives off the page so well to where I saw Kathy. I know Kathy.
Mhm.
I'm like, Kathy girl, really? Like I am literally sitting down with her in a car traveling somewhere, and I'm like, Kathy,
Right.
Kathy.
Right. That was Nikisha. That was her those were her comments. Girl, really? I was like, "Yeah, girl, really." Yep.
Yeah, and someone just commented saying they watch it as a show. I definitely see it as definitely a mini series. It has to be something where we get time to not only grow with Kathy, but also time
Mhm.
to be like on the next episode, be like, Kathy, really? Like to have that like Kathy, really?
But then be rooting for me at the same time, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Like the just to give an example, like when you talk about the baccalaureate speech, and
Mm.
I don't want to give the book away, but it's like I was just like, is this going? No, it didn't happen. Oh, there were moments when I'll cap it at this because I really want people to read the book who haven't. There were
Yeah.
moments when I was like, this person's gonna show up for Kathy. Oh, they didn't. I was just like, okay. But then there's just so many moments when I'm not only rooting for Kathy, but I'm cheering for Kathy in the self-reflective moments that she's
Right.
having. So
Right.
I'm telling you, like cat, like especially when it came to the third abortion and just the fact, like, I felt like there was a lot of self-reflecting that Kathy did in that moment. I'm like, yes, I was rooting for her
Yeah.
in that moment because it was just like,
Yeah.
okay, bigger picture, let me actually, yes, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Right. No, it does. It does. It makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So KE, thank you so much for being on today. I'm gonna wrap up. I have to do a little bit of wrap up things, tie it up in a nice bow before getting my
Sure.
Saturday back. But KE, it was so great to meet and chat with you today.
You too. I have fun. I appreciate it. I'm really glad that we met.
Same here, and I know that this conversation, we have so much more to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, take care. So thank you all for joining us today for the episode 8 of season 4 of Black Writers Read. Be sure to check out our website at blackwritersread.com for upcoming events, past episodes. Of course, this is season 4, and also to register for the virtual book discussion that we're having with Natasha Gordon Chippenberry on her book Finding La Nagrajita, which is scheduled for Sunday, January 28th at 2 p.m. over Zoom. This is an opportunity for folks who have already read the book and heard and saw her interview from season 3 to be in a much more intimate discussion in real time with the author. If you are interested in contributing to the Black Writers Read bookshelves that have been established at a couple of community colleges in the New England region. And also, too, if you want to ensure, and which I forgot to mention earlier, what the Black Writers Read bookshelf is I've been purchasing as the series has been continuing, purchasing the books that have been talked about on the series, and then contributing them and creating bookshelves at libraries, at community colleges within Western Massachusetts and Connecticut specifically, where I'm based. And I'm hoping to expand that. So if folks know of places who would love to have a bookshelf, please let me know. Reach out to me via blackwritersread.com. But if you're interested in contributing funds so that I can purchase more books to make these shelves happen, this is the website. We're doing a GoFundMe right now. It's gofund.me/414841C46. I'm going to find a way how to make it more customized so it's easily rememberable. That's great. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Nicole M. Young or Coco Pen Explore to keep up with episodes of both Black Writers Read and my other projects. Also, be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, as we post audio from each episode about a week or two after the live stream. Thank you all for spending your afternoon with us, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. See you soon. Thanks so much.